잘 들리시나요? 하나, 둘, 셋. 잘 들리십니까? 채팅 좀 쳐주세요. 잘 들리시면. 지금 어떠세요? 지금 잘 들리시나요? 제가 소리는 꺼놨어요. 네, 30분 시작이라서 조금 기다리도록 할게요. 작년 4분기 실적 발표를 기반으로 보자면 22년 1분기 예상 매출은 1.8에서 2 밀리언을 예상한다고 했었네요. 그리고 인베스팅닷컴에 의하면 1.25를 예상 중입니다. 뭐 어느 정도 둘이 갭이 있는데 뭐 오늘 스콜피언 공매도 리포트에 대한 반박이 좀 나왔으면 좋겠네요. 또 좋은 소식 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 벌써 나왔다고요? 아이고. 멀리 영국에서도 보시는군요. 감사합니다. earnings. 응? 홈페이지에서 이메일이 왔습니까? 자, 아직 시작 안 했는데 볼 수 있겠네요. 자, 오, 좋습니다. 매출 좋게 나왔네요. 1분기 매출은 2.0 밀리언이고 총 계약 예약 금액은 4.2 밀리언. 그리고 새로운 이테리움, 왜 이테리움이 나왔죠? 바륨으로 바꿨는데 아이온큐 포르테라는 새로운 이테리움 기반 시스템인데 2개의 큐비트를 사용하는 게이트 충실도가 향상된 버전을 발표를 할 거다 라고 얘기를 하네요. 그리고 현금성 자산은 603 밀리언에서 현재는 586.4 밀리언, 조금 줄었고 순적자는 4.2 밀리언, 조정된 에비타는 10.3 밀리언. 아직 시작 안 했죠? 매출은 상당히 좋게 나왔습니다. 작년 4분기에 예상했던 최고 매출 2 밀리언 달성을 했고 계약 예약 금액 요거는 한 3년에 걸쳐서 매출로 조금씩 실현이 되는 금액인데 작년에 이게 1년 내내 해서 16.7이었는데 비슷한 페이스로 가고 있는 것 같네요. 작년 1년 동안 16이었으니까 한 분기에 4 밀리언이면 뭐 무난하게 이 정도는 달성을 할 수 있을 것 같고요. 그러면 1분기 매출만 2 밀리언이면 작년 전체 매출 가까이 달성을 했습니다. 상당히 나쁘지 않다라고 볼 수 있을 것 같고요. 이게 아이온큐 사이트가 굉장히 폰트가 보기가 힘들게 돼 있어요. 순적자도 생각보다 많이 줄었네요. 2022년 예상 조정 에비타 손실이 55 밀리언이었는데 10 밀리언이면은 곱하기 4해도 40밖에 안 되니까 적자도 생각보다 덜 나왔고요. 네, 시작했으니까
Please
들어보겠습니다.
note that on today's call, management will refer to adjusted EBITDA, which is a non-GAAP
네, 저는 말은 안 하고 타이핑으로 이제 번역을 하겠습니다.
measure provides useful information for investors. The presentation of this information is not intended to be considered in isolation or as a substitute for the financial information presented in accordance with GAAP. This call discusses certain non-GAAP measures, and you are directed to our press release for a reconciliation of such measures to GAAP. Before we begin, please note that some of our remarks in this call will be forward-looking. Therefore, please refer to the cautionary statement in today's press release for additional details about these remarks. Please note that forward-looking statements made during this conference call speak only as of today. Now, I will turn it over to Peter Chapman, President and CEO of IonQ. Peter?
Thanks, Jordan, and thank you all for joining us today. Roughly a year before we went public, we defined a multi-year plan to drive revenue growth and technical progress over 6 years. Today, we stand at the 18-month mark, or about a quarter of the way into that plan. I thought I would use this earnings call to give a quick report card on progress to date and provide my thoughts on the roadmap ahead. Originally, we expected to achieve 114 million TCV contract bookings cumulatively in the first 4 years of the plan. On the last earnings call, we discussed that we are seeing an increased interest in customers purchasing dedicated IonQ quantum computers. As a result, we announced our expectation that TCV contract bookings could be 9 figures for the 3-year period from 2021 to 2023, roughly a full year ahead of our original financial projections. Our original financial plan was based in part on the cumulative numbers of systems IonQ expected to bring online over that period. We projected 1 in 2022, 2 in 2023, 7 in 2024, 17 by 2025, and 33 by 2026. We currently have 2 IonQ Harmony systems that feature 11 physical qubits available via our cloud partners. We recently announced our latest generation system called IonQ Aria, which features up to 32 physical qubits and 20 algorithmic qubits. In addition, a second Aria system is currently under construction to meet potential rising customer demand. Today, we are excited to announce the next generation in our series of ytterbium systems called IonQ Forte. Our early internal results indicate that this machine has an even higher average 2-qubit gate fidelity than Aria. In coming days, we will be issuing a press release on preliminary fidelity of the system and a blog post that will provide additional insight into how Forte operates. We anticipate that Forte will launch for beta access in the second half of this year. We also have our first system based on barium qubits. Controlled by longer wavelength visible light, barium systems are expected to make the optical design much easier while conferring higher performance. To reach our 2023 goals and beyond, this year we're working to establish and optimize our manufacturing process to build systems at scale. We are focused on features such as system footprint, manufacturability, deployability, industrial design, and reliability as part of this development process. With regard to the number of systems we expected this year, we are clearly ahead of plan. On the applications front, I am happy to report that early results with customers demonstrate that we're making serious inroads with quantum machine learning. Recently, we were able to show that we can effectively train quantum image classification models to achieve performance that rivals correspondingly classical machine learning models, while using only a small fraction of the number of training parameters. These learnings build upon the results we previously reported on the speed of the training of the machine learning models, and the results themselves were more expressive and better captured the signal of the original data. We are learning how this can lead to superior performance as we scale up to higher numbers of algorithmic qubits. In summary, IonQ is firing on all cylinders, making progress on or ahead of schedule when compared to our roadmap. But that's just what we've accomplished to date. What's more important is where we are in our race to make quantum computers that broadly beat classical systems. The first thing we need to do is to push our systems to their limits on native gate fidelity, i.e. the fidelity the qubits can achieve without error correction. IonQ Forte is another step in that direction. But as you'll see with upcoming results from our barium system, adding this new qubit species to our arsenal pushes us even further along that path. Initial testing suggests the fundamental error limit for 2-qubit gates using barium qubits will be significantly lower than ytterbium qubits, with a fidelity limit of roughly 99.98%. We've already demonstrated and released data showing that our first barium system has extremely low state preparation and measurement, or SPAM errors, another important type of qubit error. To go beyond the fundamental limits of native gate fidelity, one must implement error correction, which requires a higher number of physical qubits. Last year, together with our university partners, IonQ became the first quantum computing company to actually implement an error-corrected qubit. And we did it with a 13-to-1 qubit overhead. An important next milestone for the industry will be to run gates between multiple error-corrected qubits that result in lower 2-qubit error rates. Even with a low overhead, we need more physical qubits to implement error correction. We've already proven our multi-core chips can fit more qubits into a single system. Our investment in manufacturing engineering this year will enable us to continue scaling up our systems so that we can achieve error correction in the future. At the same time, we're also working to connect multiple systems together to combine their power using a technology called photonic interconnects. Our partner labs at the University of Maryland and Duke University pioneered this idea many years ago, with demonstrations appearing in peer-reviewed journals such as Science and Nature, and this technology has been reproduced by many other labs throughout the world. IonQ is working hard to translate these ideas from the laboratory into a commercial setting. The era of broadly applicable quantum computers is coming into crisper focus every day. To summarize, I'm pleased with the progress IonQ is making both commercially and technologically. We entered the public market as the first pure-play quantum computing hardware company with the belief that we can develop world-changing technology. We have demonstrated the value of our systems numerous times with customers who are working to understand how to apply quantum computing to their everyday business problems in industries ranging from energy and mobility to machine learning and financial services. Financially, we are very well capitalized with cash equivalents, and investments of approximately $586 million, which on our current plan, we believe to be sufficient to get the company to profitability without the need to raise any additional capital. Last quarter, we were honored in the Time 100 Most Influential Companies list for 2022, alongside some of the most innovative companies of our era, and we intend to continue pushing the limits on quantum technology. None of this would be possible without the relentless efforts of the entire IonQ team, our respect for fundamental science, and our long-standing dedication to developing and commercializing cutting-edge technology. While there is still much work to be done, we are proud of our accomplishments so far. I encourage you to read through our 2022 letter to shareholders that outlines our vision for the future of IonQ and the quantum computing industry. We believe that the future is bright and are happy to have you alongside us for the journey. Next, Thomas will provide an update on the financials.
Thank you, Peter. It has been quite the quarter. Before diving into our financials, I would first like to take a few minutes to address some common questions we have received over the last quarter about the increasing likelihood that IonQ will sell entire quantum computers in addition to selling access over the cloud. Let's start with why prospect will be asking to buy entire systems. There are two main reasons why a customer might prefer to own a system. The first and most common is the desire to control when they compute. As of now, our cloud offering operates with a queue system, and there are certain times where a customer may be in line behind a large number of jobs waiting to be processed, say, on a Monday morning at 9:30 Eastern, when the U.S. stock exchange is open and financial customers start trading. If you need quantum compute time to process something time-sensitive, for instance, a hedge fund financial model or an update to road conditions, this probably would not work well for you. So having a dedicated system and being able to define the queue is likely to be important to many users. The second reason is security and a need to own certain sensitive data on in-house systems. Although we are already very diligent about keeping our customers' data secure, there are certain entities who, due to internal controls and procedures, cannot run specific processes or expose sensitive data to any machine besides their own. As we mentioned on our last quarter call, we are already seeing substantial interest in system sales stemming from private companies and governments alike. To that end, we are doubling down on making IonQ quantum computers government ready. Our government sales efforts are already bearing fruit. In April, we announced that IonQ was part of a group of private companies and universities that received a Research and Development Award from DARPA to fund a quantum algorithms benchmarking project. While contracting is still being finalized, we are the only quantum hardware maker selected for this multi-year award, and are excited to contribute on an initiative that will estimate the resources necessary to run important quantum applications. This is something IonQ has long been a public advocate of, as we believe absolute transparency will benefit the quantum computing industry as a whole, and give customers a standard with which to compare systems across different methods. Moving on to our financial results from the first quarter. We are happy to announce we achieved total revenue of $2 million and bookings of $4.2 million. Our investments in growing our sales team are starting to bear fruit. Moving down the statement of operations. For Q1 2022, our total operating costs and expenses for the first quarter were $20.2 million, up 171% from $7.5 million in the comparable prior year period. Break this down further. Our research and development costs for the first quarter were $7.3 million, up 101% from the $3.7 million in the year prior period. Recall that, as Peter noted, we are investing heavily in R&D, and given anticipated demand, are building more systems than previously projected this year. Our sales and marketing costs in the first quarter were $1.9 million, up 724% from $227,000 in the prior year period. This increase was due to the growth in our sales team, as IonQ has started to invest heavily in our commercialization. Our general and administrative costs in the first quarter were $9.2 million, up 211% from $3 million in the comparable prior year period. This increase is largely attributable to a growth in stock-based compensation expense, which was $4.8 million for the first quarter, compared to $1 million in the comparable prior year period. All of this resulted in a net loss of $4.2 million in the first quarter, compared to $7.3 million in the prior year period. It is important to note that these results include a non-cash gain of $13.4 million for the first quarter related to the fair value of warrant liability. We saw an adjusted EBITDA loss for the first quarter of $10.3 million, compared to a $5.5 million loss in the prior year period. Turning now to our balance sheet. Cash equivalents and investments as of March 31st, 2022, were $586 million. We believe this gives us sufficient cash reserves to get to profitability without needing to raise additional funds, given our current roadmap. With this substantial cash position, the company's operations should be well positioned to deal with the ups and downs of market gyrations, energy prices, interest rates, and so on. Now turning to our second quarter outlook. Given that we are still at the beginning of our commercialization phase, I want to reiterate my comment from our last earnings call that we expect bookings to continue to be lumpy for quite some time. Our projections for the second quarter financial results reflect this lumpiness. In the second quarter, we expect revenue to be between $2.3 and $2.5 million. We anticipate second quarter bookings of between $3 and $5 million. We are excited to share that we are increasing our expectations of full year 2022 bookings from a range of $20 to $24 million on our last earnings call to a new range of $23 million to $27 million. And with that, operator, we would now like to open the line for questions.
At this time, we will be conducting a question and answer session. One moment, please, while we poll for questions. Our first question is from David William of Benchmark. Please go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, and congrats on the progress.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch, I guess, real quick, maybe Peter, but as you kind of think about the backdrop of quantum computing and the demand trends, and you think about your customer base, can you kind of help us parse out your customers in terms of those that are more commercial versus academic and research driven? How much of your revenue or how much of maybe your bookings are driven by beyond maybe the academic world?
Let's see, we have a wide kind of range of different customers. It's a good spread. Some of it, to be honest, comes from cloud companies, and we don't know exactly how customers are using it. So there's kind of a wild card there, if you will. Anecdotally, we see things out on the internet where students are using the quantum computers to do their quantum homework. Professors are using the quantum computers, our quantum computers, to teach classes and make YouTube videos. And then you have companies, large companies that are doing, early work on these and producing scientific papers. So, it is kind of a mixture of all of them. I'm not sure that I even would be able, to be honest, to generate an exact kind of breakdown because we don't have full transparency into sometimes what the cloud companies, what their users are. We don't get their customer ID information.
Okay, that's helpful and makes sense. And then maybe there's been some discussion of just, I guess, the ability of quantum machines to perform simple calculations, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the importance of algorithmic structure and why quantum machines are maybe not as useful in solving practical logical problems like your Casio calculator might?
Yep. It's a great question. So, quantum computing is likely to solve certain differential equations, and at the same time, not designed for simple math. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around. Adding 1 + 1 isn't what quantum computers are designed for. If you want simple math, there's an app for that on your phone. And today, we're working on problems like general object recognition that looks to rival the best classical technology today. And, I understand for everyone, trying to understand kind of this quantum stuff is hard. And so, how is it you could solve differential equations and at the same time, how can it be hard to do 1 + 1? We've never said that quantum computers are going to be good at everything. They're going to be very good, we believe, against a certain subset that happens to be commercially interesting going forward.
Very good. Thank you for that. And then maybe just a little bit of color around ARIA. It's just coming online. Can you talk about the qubit capacity there of this system, how that compares in the magnitude of performance differential to the prior generations?
Yeah, I'm going to switch this since we have Jungsang on the line here. I'll let him answer it since he's the expert.
All right, thank you for the question. Yeah, IonQ ARIA is capable of being configured up to 32 qubits. We can load it with different numbers of qubits depending on the optimal configuration and what the application is. Currently, as we have guided, our performance metric of choice is algorithmic qubits. And we believe that currently it's being operated with 21 physical qubits because that achieves the optimal results in maximizing the algorithmic qubits, which means that customers can run the most complicated quantum circuits in this configuration.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you. I certainly appreciate that. And then maybe just one last one, if I can, and maybe Tom, it's better for you. But I understand that the bookings are lumpy, but it looks like that between this quarter and the guidance, you're right around that midpoint of your bookings for the year. Just kind of wondering how we should think about maybe the second half in terms of bookings, what those expectations are. And I know previously you kind of talked about maybe the fourth quarter being a little bit heavier, but just kind of how do we think about the bookings for the remainder of the year?
So, as with all technology, we expect the bookings to be backloaded. There's no good reason for it. It's just how people spend towards their budget. And we would, of course, if we have the opportunity to finish a sale earlier, we will. And all of the people listening here on this call will be the first to know, of course. But as we said on the call, we are able to raise our guidance based on the signals we're getting from the market.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much. Certainly appreciate the time, and best of luck on the quarter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Ruben Roy of Wayspark Capital. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you. I guess I wanted to start, Peter, if we could talk a little bit about the assumptions around the cumulative number of systems that you talked about getting up into the 30s by 2026. Maybe just spend a little bit of time on how you're thinking about those systems in terms of ytterbium versus barium systems. Can we get to commercialization with ytterbium, or to your point around error correction using barium qubits, do we need to start to see some of those types of systems come to market before we can get to real commercialization of revenue? That would be helpful. And then also, I guess around that same topic, if you could just talk a little bit, you mentioned that you're working on optimizing manufacturing and system footprint, et cetera. How are you envisioning sort of the footprint of these systems once we get out to maybe 25, 26? Are these going to be smaller in form factor? I think at some point you had mentioned that we might see some rack-mountable systems out in the marketplace. So an update on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Great question, Ruben. So I think it's true for any quantum computing company that the very first thing you do is you look to optimize the native gate fidelity, because that's kind of, it's low-hanging fruit. And the other thing is it really determines what the overhead that you're going to have to do for error correction. So the more you can get that to be lower, then the better in terms of the number of physical qubits you'll have to consume. So on one hand, we're busily pushing in both ytterbium and in barium to get the lowest number we possibly can. And we've talked about how basically at ytterbium, we think that number, I think roughly is 99.8, and at barium, it's 99.98. So basically kind of almost another 9. And then after that, you have to start thinking, at least in IonQ's case, we probably need to do error correction to bring in more fidelity. And that means we need more physical qubits to do there. So we're kind of pushing on native at one time, and now what you're hearing from us is we're starting to also push on the number of physical qubits. We have been doing that in the sense that, for instance, we announced a new chip where the number of qubits was much higher. We will continue to do that, and increasing the number of qubits on the processor, the QPU itself. And now what you're hearing is that we're starting to thinking about building more quantum computers so that we would have a pool of physical qubits so that we could start to do error correction. And a key kind of piece to that story is that as soon as you have multiple systems, you need to network them together, because you need to do entanglement from one QPU to another, which means that they have to be networked. This is true not just for IonQ, but I believe it's true for any technology. So now the question is we're starting to think about how can we manufacture more computers, more quantum computers. And now it's the natural time to sit down and say, let's work on shrinking them. Let's start working more on reducing their costs in terms of to manufacture. Those haven't been our primary focus really up to this point. And now going forward, we're standing up a separate team who that's what their sole focus is kind of going forward. And if it turns out that we can't make progress, on, if you will, in terms of a risk factor of one or the other qubit species, it just means that error correction is coming sooner. And that isn't what we believe. We're gearing up really for the end game, in the race to the finish here. So that's the reason we're getting started. And as we talked about in the last earnings call, if we're starting to get interest from potential sales, well, we should start getting ready for that as well.
Very helpful. Thanks, Peter. Also, I wanted to ask about the ARIA systems. You mentioned a second ARIA system under construction. You also had the announcement around collaboration with Microsoft for the ARIA. Are both of your ARIA systems going to be available via the cloud, or is one going to be available via IonQ cloud? I just would love some detail on how you're thinking about deploying those systems over the course of this year.
I'm not sure we've decided all the final details, but in general, what we try to do is to build two systems in the same class. That way, if there's one that's down for maintenance, that you've got another one that you can make available. You're adding 2x the capacity when they're both up and running.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. And then just a quick follow-up question for Thomas. You mentioned the growth in the sales team. Can you give us an update of where you are in terms of how you were thinking about sales headcount for the year, how much further you think you're going to go this year, and maybe update around any other sort of near-term headcount additions that you need to make around R&D or otherwise?
Yeah, as we kind of talked about, we started off with a very small sales team last year. We've had to set a goal of the sales team this year, and I believe we hit that in the first quarter, or pretty darn close to it. In terms of the number of people, we wanted to get them on board early, obviously, because there's no point in getting salespeople on at the end of the year. It's going to help your sales numbers. So we set an aggressive goal on kind of putting the team together. So they're busily working on sales now, and I would expect that the sales effort will, continue to grow. There's lots of greenfield in terms of opportunity, both, domestically and also internationally.
Good update. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Ruben.
Our next question is from Richard Shannon of Craig-Hallum. Please go ahead.
Well, great. Thanks, Peter and Thomas, for getting me in here. So I want to follow up on a couple of questions here or topics today and brought up in the past here, specifically regarding customers who are interested in buying the system. I guess two angles to look at this. First of all, is there real demand here for private companies buying a quantum computer in the near term? And would those customers be using it just for themselves or potentially sharing it with a small group? Because it seems like a 8-figure kind of a purchase might be a little bit heavy for most organizations, at least initially here. Or is this something that's mostly a government kind of a sale here, at least in the near term?
You can put it on your credit card. So, more seriously, I would say there's right now what we're seeing is a lot of demand and interest there. Many times it's for an area or a group or an organization that's looking to get it for kind of a group of end users. Sometimes with let's just say it could be in a university setting or in an international or national setting at a government. So it's kind of in those contexts.
Okay, that's fair enough. Second question I had was on your new Forte system. I guess I think you described this as a ytterbium-based system. Is that correct, Peter?
That's correct. Yep. Okay.
So are there any advancements in this system here that are translatable or usable in the future barium systems? And do you expect to have and continue to develop next generation versions of ytterbium?
I'm gonna switch that to Jungsing since we have the expert online. So,
all right. Thank you for the question. Yes, these systems actually take a while to build. So we actually have been planning and developing the systems for quite some time, obviously. And I think we, at this point, we have this Forte actually includes a few new features. One of them is the way that we address this individual ions to run logic gates. The beams are actually steerable. I think Peter mentioned about that in one of the conferences at the end of last year. We have that technology. And those technologies and approaches actually translate very easily into other atomic species or other qubit species like barium. So, certainly many of these architectural features and the underlying technologies are definitely aligned to all of our future systems, whether they are ytterbium or barium. So, at this point, we are very confident with our ytterbium technology. We continue to make higher performing quantum computers with them, and we believe that trend will continue with Forte. But I think we're also making a lot of background understanding so we can actually transition with barium. We are finding out some of our early measurements that barium systems do give us a lot more room in terms of higher performance systems. So that type of R&D is going to continue into the future.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that, Jung-Sung. My last question is a follow-on from an earlier question today, or at least coming off of that, which is, understanding your customer set here. And Peter, you mentioned that since some of your customers come through the cloud, you don't know identities. It's hard to kind of profile that. Is that suggesting that cloud is actually a significant portion of that? I guess my assumption was that most of those were coming from certain contracted customers and a relatively small amount from cloud. So can you clarify that for us, please?
We expect the cloud to be an important part of the quantum ecosystem going forward. It offers an easy way for customers to sign up and give it a try. Anyone on the call, with a credit card, you could be up and running on one of our quantum computers, pretty easily. So in that sense, it's particularly important. But the cloud is it's a commoditized market. It's intended to give you cheaply access to hardware, and quantum isn't at that place yet. We're at the early stages of the TV market, not the end. So it hasn't been commoditized. So one would expect that with kind of limited supply, that it would make more sense to kind of have other business models that is not as favorable in terms of, say, the cloud. So we think that the cloud stuff is very important. We're very happy that we've kind of democratized access to these early quantum computers so everyone can get access to it and give it a try. But at the same time, I think it'll be a while before the cloud market is the market, if you will, for quantum.
Okay, fair enough. Appreciate the detail, Peter. That is all for me. Thank you.
Our next question is from Scott Fessler of Morgan Stanley. Please go ahead.
Thank you. When you guys announced ARIA, you had named a couple new large customers that were already trialing. With the beta for Forte launching later this year, do you anticipate that new customers will headline these trials, or will it largely be demoed by the same customers that are already on existing systems?
No, we very much do. So, it is, we have, usually, when we release a new piece of hardware, the first people that get a crack at it is the internal applications team, as you can imagine, and they're often working with customers, and so and they might get access very early to the system. Maybe there might be bugs, or with that early access, it's always not perfectly smooth, but that's but customers want the kind of latest and greatest, and so that's kind of part of the deal. So, and they're likely to be the first ones to write, papers or make announcements or something as a result.
Okay. Just to follow up there then, on a slightly different topic. So, as far as for Thomas, for the growth in, or upping the yearly guidance for total contract bookings, if you roughly split the customer set into like 3 broad categories between government, academic, and commercial, where do you see the greatest growth coming that gives you conviction in taking up the contract bookings estimate?
So we actually see a lot of inbound interest, and what we don't know is who is going to break first. What we're presenting is a weighted view of our sales funnel, and together they form our forecast. So I can't tell you which one it is because at our early stage of commercialization, I mean, every sale is binary. It happens or it doesn't. And so I don't know, but I will also say, as we stated before, we do not intend to break up segments just yet. I think we're too young a company to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'd say you'd have to give us a little more time to have enough data to be able to draw an appropriate trend line.
All right. Thanks.
Our last question is from Quinn Bolton of Needham & Company. Please go ahead. Quinn, your line is live.
Hi, sorry, I was on mute. Just want to say congratulations on the progress to date. Had a few questions. First on Forte. Does Forte use the same quantum processor that Aria does? So it's a 32 physical qubit system. And a related question: do the steerable laser beams or the steerable laser system, does that end up giving you better gate fidelity? Does it give you faster gate speed as a result of the different system?
Yeah, this is Jung-san. Yes, I think that's a great question. So the first question is, we've actually been on a trend to make sure that our quantum computers become more software configurable, meaning we like to eventually get to a point where the number of qubits is really not tied to any of the underlying hardware components in the system. So IonQ Forte takes a big step in that direction, in the sense that in the previous systems we had 32 fixed beams, and that's what limits the number of maximum qubits to 32. But with this steering system, we actually have that very much under software control. So at this point, the Forte can actually, the control system we have in Forte can actually address more than 40 qubits. Although, there are other reasons why we're actually not exactly operating at those levels yet. But these are kind of technological pieces we're putting together so that in the future, our quantum computers will become much more scalable and not necessarily tied, the qubit numbers are not necessarily tied to the hardware. And then the answer to your second question is, yes, indeed, it turns out that using this beam steering approach, we can actually make the laser beam that addresses the ions to be much more stable, and actually be less susceptible to some fluctuations in the system. So indeed, we're seeing that our gate fidelities are getting better, and I think we can also deliver more power to the system. So I think we have a lot of room to continue to improve the gate speed in these systems as well.
Great, thank you for that. The second question was just on now that you've announced sort of Forte and sort of beta availability second half of this year with broader availability next year. I think, Peter, in the past you've sort of said that the public cloud systems, may be sort of the generation -1, and so as Forte becomes public or becomes available, do you expect Aria to sort of come to the cloud sort of second half of this year once Forte is available to to private beta customers?
Yep. No. I think you're seeing what I said in action, if you will. Aria is just coming to the cloud, and at the same time we're announcing the current generation, and we haven't announced that would go to the cloud yet.
Understood. And lastly, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just it kind of is following that trend.
Got it. And then just lastly for Thomas, I'm wondering if you might be willing to sort of give us, on the revenue forecast of 10.2 to 10.7 this year that you're reiterating. Can you give us some sense what you would think the EBITDA loss might be at that revenue level? Just trying to get a sense of what you expect OpEx might look like over the balance of the year.
So I think that we shouldn't expect huge variations on that front, because when we increase bookings towards the end of the year or in the second half, there will be less impact on the rev rec line, which is what flows back down to EBITDA.
But I mean, if I think you did 10.3 of adjusted EBITDA loss in Q1. Do you think something in the 40 to 50 million EBITDA loss is the right level to be thinking about based on the 10.2 to 10.7 million revenue? I'm assume that OpEx probably has some upward bias over the course of the year.
Yeah, so we're holding firm at our previously stated EBITDA loss of 55.
Okay.
So it will not. It should not increase the loss, because even if we have to build these things as well, of course.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the question and answer session, and I would like to turn the call back to Peter Chapman for closing remarks.
Well, thank you all for joining our Q1 2022 earnings call and for all your thoughtful questions. I'd like to also thank the entire IonQ team for all their hard work that has brought us to this point, to new heights for this quarter. And we look forward to seeing everyone in the Q2 earnings call next quarter. So thank you again for joining, and have a great evening.
This concludes today's conference. Thank you for joining us. You may now disconnect your line.
자, 한 40분, 45분 정도 해서 끝났는데 한번 정리를 해보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 그래서 우선 작년 4분기 기준으로 올해 22년 1분기 예상 매출이 1.8에서 2 밀리언이다 라고 제가 작년 4분기 영상에서 얘기를 했었어요. 이게 아마 제가 정확히는 언제인지 잘 기억이 나지 않는데, 그리고 investing.com은 올해 1분기 매출을 1.25 밀리언 정도로 예상을 했었는데 어떻게 나왔느냐, 1분기 매출은 실제 2.0 밀리언으로 이제 아이온큐가 예상했던 최대치가 나왔고요. 그리고 investing.com이 이제 전문가들이 예측했던 1.25 밀리언은 비트했죠. 그래서 어닝 서프라이즈가 나왔고, 총 계약 예약 금액은 이제 3년 정도에 걸쳐서 매출로 실현되는 금액인데 4.2 밀리언 정도로 나왔습니다. 그래서 실적 자체는 좋게 나왔고요. 여기에 이제 새로 발표한 게 아이온큐 포르테라고 불리우는 새로운 세대의 양자 컴퓨터가 나왔다라고 얘기를 했는데, 상세 스펙은 얘기를 아직 그 기사 나온 게 없어서 곧 나올 거다라고 얘기를 했는데, 새로운 이테리움 기반 시스템이라고 합니다. 바륨으로 바꾼 줄 알았는데 이제 이테리움 쪽으로도 계속 개발을 하고 있나 봐요. 그래서 2개의 큐비트를 쓰는 게이트의 충실도가 올라갔다, 즉 오류율이 더 떨어진 버전이다 라고 하고요. 그 현재 현금성 자산은 작년 4분기 12월 31일 기준으로 603 밀리언 달러가 있었는데 현재는 586.4 밀리언 달러가 있어서 크게 떨어지진 않았습니다. 그리고 순 적자는 4.2 밀리언, 조정된 에비타 기준으로는 10.3 밀리언으로 적자도 예상했던 수준보다 소폭 감소를 했습니다. 아마 매출이 늘어서 그랬겠죠. 아직 유의미한 매출이라고 보긴 어려운데, 또 무슨 얘기가 있었냐, 이건 20이죠. 그래서 최근 세대였던 아이온큐 아리아는 32 물리적 큐비트를 가지고 있고, 그 중에 20개 큐비트는 이제 알고리즘에 돌렸을 경우 신뢰할 만한 결과가 나오는 수준이다. 그래서 이제 스콜피언 리프트가 32 큐비트는 없다라고 하는 것에 대해 반박을 해줬고요. 그리고 이 아리아 시스템의 차세대 2세대 아이온큐 양자 컴퓨터는 현재 제작 중이다라고 밝혔습니다. 자, 그래서 이제 아이온큐 포르테는 상세한 스펙은 곧 발표할 예정이고, 베타 액세스, 이제 지정된 사용자들이 테스트할 수 있는 거는 하반기에 가능할 예정이다. 그리고 이제 바륨 기반으로도 나오고 있죠. 그리고 2트랙으로 가고 있는 것 같습니다. 그리고 올해는 이제 양자 컴퓨터를 제조하는 시설 쪽에도 집중을 해서 제조 프로세스를 최적화하고 더 많은 세대의 양자 컴퓨터를 생산할 예정이다. 그리고 양자 머신러닝에서 두각을 나타내고 있다. 뭐 이거는 다 알고 계실 거고, 그래서 아이온큐는 모든 스케줄, 계획과 로드맵을 초과 달성하고 있다. 그래서 아주 잘 하고 있다라고 얘기를 했습니다. 그리고 아이온큐는 이제 전 세계 최초로 오류 수정 큐비트를 시연한 기업인데 13개의 물리적 큐비트로 하나의 오류 수정된 큐비트를 구현을 했다. 그래서 13대 1인데 이거 이제 초전도체 쪽으로 가면 이게 뭐 수천에서 수백만까지도 올라갈 수 있습니다. 그래서 오류 수정을 대비하기 위해서 현재 제조 엔지니어링 쪽에도 추가 투자를 하고 있어서 이제 제조 쪽으로 탄탄히 다지면은 이제 여러 개의 양자 컴퓨터 칩을 양자 네트워크로 묶어서 이 13대 1이라는 낮은 간접 비용 오버헤드로 뭐 수천, 수백 큐비트를 구현할 것이다 라는 얘기도 해줬고요. 그래서 여기에 이제 광학 상호 연결 기술, 뭐 optic interconnect 라는 기술을 사용할 것이다 라고 해서 이제 연구소에서 시연된 기술을 상업적인 기술로 업그레이드 중이다. 그래서 앞으로 제조 시설을 탄탄하게 다지면서 수백 수천 큐비트 달성을 위해 가고 있다 라고 했는데, 뭐 에너지 분야, 모빌리티 분야, 머신러닝, 금융 분야 등등에서 두각을 나타내고 있고, 특히 현금성 자산이 아직 빵빵하다, 580밀리언 이상이다 라고 얘기를 드렸죠. 그래서 추가 유상증자나 뭐 이런 대출 같은 거 없이 사업을 진행할 수 있다라고 얘기를 해서 이거는 기존 주주들한테 호재라고 볼 수 있겠습니다. 그래서 유상증자는 없을 것이다 라고 얘기를 했고, 뭐 여러분들 다 아시다시피 타임지지 가장 영향력 있는 100대 기업 안에 선정이 됐고, 양자 컴퓨터 상업화를 위해 끊임없는 노력과 헌신을 하고 있다. 그리고 현재까지 업적이 매우 자랑스럽고 로드맵을 초과 달성하고 있고, 반드시 2022년 CEO의 주주 서한을 읽어보시기 바란다. 이거는 제 영상 중에 있으니까 꼭 보시면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 이제 Q&A 시간이 됐죠. 그래서 양자 컴퓨터를 왜 사느냐라는 질문이 많이 들어왔다고 합니다. 클라우드로 현재 사용이 가능하지만 이제 사전에 여러 작업들이 예약되어 있을 수 있기 때문에 고객들이 원하는 시간에 사용하기가 어렵다. 그리고 보안적으로 중요한 데이터를 사용해야 될 수도 있기 때문에 이 퍼블릭하게 공개된 클라우드에 올리기 어렵다는 거죠. 그래서 사기업과 정부 모두 양자 컴퓨터를 사고 싶어 한다. 근데 곧 양자 컴퓨터 판매할 거다라고 얘기를 했죠. 그리고 이미 이 부분에 대해서는 9자리 이상의 이제 매출이 그 계약 예약 금액이 발생할 거라고 했는데, 그거는 최소 1200억 원을 얘기를 합니다. 그래서 이게 2021년부터 23년까지라고 했는데 아마 곧 매출로 실현이 될 것 같아요. 그래서 매출이 이제 그 기하급수적으로 늘어날 거다라는 얘기를 다시 해줬고, 뭐 정부 쪽에서도 세일즈를 열심히 하고 있어서 뭐 다르파에서도 프로젝트를 수주했었는데, 뭐 여기도 아시다시피 이제 토마스 크레이머 CFO가 보고한 사항에 의하면 매출은 2밀리언으로 잘 나왔고 계약 예약 금액 역시 4밀리언 이상을 달성을 했습니다. 그래서 목표치를 초과 달성했고, 뭐 보시면 영업비용, 연구개발비 등등이 100% 이상 증가를 하고 있어서 회사가 빠르게 커가면서 투자를 이제 무겁게 하고 있다라고 얘기를 해줬습니다. 그리고 순적자, 뭐 매출 증가로 인해서 적자가 소폭 감소를 했고요. 현금성 자산 역시 빵빵하기 때문에 앞으로 추가 유상증자나 뭐 대출은 필요 없을 것이다. 그래서 2분기 예상 가이던스도 상당히 좋게 줬습니다. 현재 1분기 매출이 2밀리언이라고 말씀을 드렸는데 다음 분기 예상 매출은 2.3에서 2.5밀리언 정도를 예상을 하고 있고, 예약 금액은 1분기가 4.2였는데 3에서 5 정도를 예측을 하고 있다. 그리고 22년 전체 이제 예약 계약 금액은 20에서 24밀리언을 예측을 했는데 이걸 23에서 27로 상향 조정했다 라고 해서 가이던스 역시 1분기보다 2분기가 더 뛰어날 거고, 전체 2022년 역시 상향 조정을 했기 때문에 이제 애프터장에서 또 강세를 보이고 있는 것으로 보입니다. 그래서 보시면은 2022년에 계약 예약 금액은 20에서 24로 작년 4분기에 예측을 했죠. 근데 요거를 23에서 27로 상향 조정을 했고, 21년 매출의 5배가 될 거다라고 예측을 했습니다. 22년에. 근데 21년 매출이 얼마였냐? 2밀리언이었죠. 근데 지금 한 분기에만 올해 1분기에만 매출이 2밀리언이 나왔기 때문에 작년 총 매출을 이미 달성을 했고요. 그래서 올해 2022년 매출은 작년 매출에 비해 최소 4배 이상, 그리고 아이온큐는 5배를 예측을 했는데 무난히 달성 가능할 것으로 보입니다. 작년 대비 올해 매출은 5배 이상이 나올 거다. 그래서 Q&A, 핵심 Q&A를 좀 보면은 양자 컴퓨터의 고객은 누구인가에 대한 질문이 계속 나왔습니다. 이건 이제 애널리스트들이 파악을 좀 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 어디서 매출이 얼마나 나오는지 이제 애널리스트들도 정보가 없기 때문에 아까 여러 사람들이 물어봤죠. 근데 고객 분야가 매우 넓고 지금 클라우드에서 그 양자 컴퓨터 접근을 허용해주고 수수료를 받는 게 지금 현재 매출의 거의 전부인데, 뭐 앞으로는 양자 컴퓨터도 판매하겠지만 고객을 정확하게 파악하기 어렵다고 합니다. 왜냐면 그 고객이 사용하는 커스터머 아이디 같은 거를 따로 식별을 하지 않는다. 그래서 이 부분에 대한 대답은 아직 정확히 알 수 없다 라고 얘기를 했고요. 이제 스콜피언 공매도 리포트 내용과 비슷하게 왜 계산기와 같이 단순한 산수가 어려운가 라고 얘기했는데, 이제 사장님께서 양자 컴퓨터는 단순 산수를 위해 설계된 것이 아니다. 그래서 1+1 같은 계산은 적합하지 않은데, 이제 뭐 물체 인식을 위한 머신러닝, 뭐 확률적인 거, 미적분, 이런 확률적인 계산이 뛰어나지, 뭐 정확하게, 왜냐면 양자 계산은 확률적이기 때문에 1+1 같은 계산은 적합하지 않다라고 하면서 이제 또 공매도 리포트 내용에 간접적으로 반박을 해주셨고요. 그래서 또 김정상 교수님이 또 아리아 시스템에 대해서 32큐비트 양자 컴퓨터는 있다라고 얘기를 해주셨습니다. 또 중요한 부분이 현재 이테리움에 오류 수정을 안 했을 경우에는 99.8%의 충실도가 나오고 발효면 99.98%인데 앞으로 오류 수정을 도입하기 위해서는 더 많은 물리적 큐비트가 필요하다. 그래서 이 부분을 위해서 제조 쪽에도 투자를 많이 하고 있고요. 그리고 현재 개발된 아리아 시스템 이제 20 알고리즘 큐비트이고 32 물리적 큐비트는 곧 이제 클라우드에 올라갈 거고, 차세대 아리아 시스템은 아직 결정된 게 없는데 두 개 다 이제 클라우드에 올릴 생각이다라고 얘기를 했고요. 또 영업팀, 세일즈팀의 숫자가 늘어나고 있느냐라고 물어봤습니다. 이건 이제 간접적으로 회사의 매출이 늘어나는지를 알 수 있기 때문에 토마스 크레이머랑 이제 사장님이 지속적으로 영업팀은 숫자가 늘어나고 있고 국외 영업을 위해 계속 공격적으로 팀을 키우고 있다라고 얘기를 했습니다. 그리고 또 양자 컴퓨터의 수요는 어디서 많은가, 사기업인가 정부인가 정확하게 대답을 해주지 않았고요. 그리고 또 질문 중에 하나가, 이건 또 저희도 궁금했었을 것 같아요. 왜 이테리움 쪽을 다시 제조를 하는가? 왜냐면 저번에 이제 작년 12월에 Q2B 행사에서 이테리움에서 바륨으로 바꿨다라고 했었잖아요. 근데 이테리움 세대가 새로 나왔습니다. 포르테. 근데 왜 만들었냐라는 질문에 이제 김정상 교수님이 뭐 포르테가 이제 바륨이 아닌 이테리움을 사용하지만 이 두 원자를 사용하는 양자 컴퓨터 모두 기반 기술은 동일하기 때문에 이제 투트랙으로 간다라는 얘기 같습니다. 그래서 앞으로 이테리움을 사용한 양자 컴퓨터도 계속 나올 수 있다라는 여지를 열어두셨고, 또 물어봤죠. 사기업, 정부, 학계 어디서 제일 매출이 많이 발생하느냐. 아직 우리가 그 매출을 분류하기에는 너무 초기 단계이고 정확하게 말해줄 수 없다. 왜냐면 이제 애널리스트들도 정보가 없으니까 계속 물어보는 것 같습니다. 그들도 모르니까. 그러니까 이 정도로 아직 전문가들도 양자 컴퓨터 분야에 잘 모르기 때문에 일반 대중들이 아직 아이온큐의 투자를 우리가 바라는 거 역시 욕심일 수 있다. 그만큼 극초기 시장이다라고 얘기를 할 수 있을 것 같고요. 그리고 새로 개발된 이테리움 세대인 포르테는 이제 아리아와 같이 32 물리적 큐비트 수준인가, 아니면 게이트 충실도 또는 속도는 더 빠른가라고 물어봤을 때 이제 김정상 교수님이 포르테는 이제 40 물리적 큐비트 이상을 포함할 수 있다. 그리고 이제 새로운 스티어링 엔지니어링 방법을 사용한다고 하는데, 이게 뭔지는 저도 정확히 모르지만 이온을 다루는 레이저가 더 안정적으로 업그레이드 되었기 때문에 게이트 충실도나 게이트 이제 연산 속도 모두 개선될 것이다. 되었다라고 얘기를 해줬습니다. 네, 그래서 뭐 그렇게 사장님이 뭐 임직원들이 열심히 하고 있고 다음 어닝콜에 봅시다라고 얘기를 하면서 마무리를 했습니다. 뭐 전체적으로 예상보다 더 좋은 실적을 내놨고, 새로운 세대인 포르테를 이제 발표를 했는데 이 상세 스펙은 곧 또 기사로 나올 테니까 그 부분에 대해서 얘기를 해보면 좋을 것 같고요. 뭐 무엇보다 좋은 소식은 현금성 자산이 많기 때문에 또 이런 지금 인플레이션이나 뭐 러시아 우크라이나 전쟁 전에 이미 스펙 상장을 하면서 현금성 자산을 크게 확보를 해놓은 것이 만족스럽고 이제 이 부분에 대해 걱정이 되지 않는다라는 사장님이 또 주주서원에서 말씀을 해주셨는데, 뭐 저희 주주들 입장에서는 뭐 지금 장이 좋지 않아서 주가가 많이 떨어졌지만 회사가 해가는 거를 보면은 로드맵도 초과 달성하고 있고, 뭐 이제 곧 양자 컴퓨터 실물 판매가 시작되면은 1,000억, 1,200억 원 이상의 매출이 발생할 거기 때문에 뭐 저는 걱정 없이 홀딩을 해도 될 것 같다라고 판단을 내리는데, 이건 제 개인적인 생각이고, 혹시 뭐 매매를 고민하신 분들은 오늘 제 실적 발표 분석, 뭐 지금 풀 버전도 올리겠지만 또 저녁에는 제가 또 압축을 해서 요약 버전을 또 올릴 테니 그걸 보시고 또 공부를 하시고 판단을 하시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 네, 그래서 오늘 이른 시간부터 거의 1시간 동안 라이브를 했는데요. 오늘은 여기까지 하고 저도 이제 물러가 보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 오늘 또 이렇게 거의 1,000분 가까이 함께 해주셨는데 아이온큐가 좋은 모습을 보여주고 있어서 저는 참 11살의 손흥민이다 라고 이제 매일경제 쪽에서 또 전문가분께서 분석을 해주셨는데 저도 그렇게 생각합니다. 이제 손흥민 선수가 잘 자라갈 수 있게 저희는 또 한국인들이 1대 대주주 아닙니까? 지금 거의 20% 가까운 지분을 가지고 있는데, 이게 테슬라 같이, 테슬라도 아마 지금 전체 지분의 2% 정도를 한국인이 가지고 있는데 뭐 유례없는 일이다라고 합니다. 그래서 테슬라로 인해서 부를 이루신 분들이 상당히 많아요. 근데 그 현상이 이제 아이온큐에서도 일어나서 이게 단순히 뭐 김치 묻었다 이런 비하를 받는 종목이 아니라 한국인들이 재빠르게 시대의 흐름을 읽어서 잘 투자를 해서 이제 아이온큐가 잘 성장했을 때 이제 부자가 되는 국민이 되는 게 제 또 비전 중에 하나입니다. 네, 그래서 뭐 저는 장기 투자할 계획이라서 추가 매수도 고려하고 있고요. 아직 제가 15,600주 정도를 가지고 있는데 뭐 평단가는 10불이 넘기 때문에 지금 손실이 50%가 넘지만 그래도 매도는 일단 2030년 100불을 목표로 하고 있기 때문에 지속적으로 가져갈 예정입니다. 네, 그래서 오늘 방송이 유익하셨으면 너무 좋았을 것 같고요. 여기서 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 모두들 좋은 하루, 좋은 한 주 되시길 바랍니다. 감사합니다. 가을바람이었습니다.